Hey there, this is Kamal, and in this video we're going to carry on with what we were learning in the previous video about Angular. So let's get started. Alright, so in the previous video we've seen how we can create a new blog post by using the add post component, right? So we've written the logic for creating a new post, and we've seen how we can use the events to actually submit that data to the backend. So now what we'll be doing is that we'll be seeing how we can, update that data, as well as we've seen that in the previous video, when you actually create a blog post, you're able to create the blog post in the database, but the user doesn't know whether it's created or not. That means the user is not being redirected to another page showcasing that the action was done successfully. So in this video we'll take care of that, then we'll add on to it and make it so that we can update that particular post as well. So before doing that, let me actually start my server. So I'll open my terminal and I'll type in ngserve. Along with that, I'll create a new terminal instance and I'll start my backend database as well. In this, you can type in the command to start the backend server. That is your database. So either you can do that, you can type in that particular command. So we have this particular command, right? If you go to JSON server website and if you scroll down, you'll see that you have this JSON server watch db.json. So either you can copy that and paste it here, or what you can do is that instead of typing this out each and every time, you can create a script. And you can run that script and that will actually execute this particular command. So in order to actually create scripts, for that you have to go to your package.json file. So if you scroll down in your folder structure, you'll see one called as package.json. If you open that particular file, you'll see that you have a lot of things inside of this. One is going to be the name of your application, that is blog. Then you have a section called as scripts. So in this you can define any type of script that you want. So we have here, right, ngserve. So you can type in the ngserve if you want, or you can actually run the script and this particular command will be executed. So what I've done is that I've created a new script called as db. In that I have given the command. Okay, so this is the exact command that we had present online. Okay, created a new script called as db and I've given value as this. So in order to actually execute this, what I can do is that I can open my terminal, and in that if you run something like npm space run space the name of the script. In this case, I can type in db because that is the name that I have provided here. I can type it out, and if I click on enter, as you can see, something has executed, right? That has actually started our server. And if you scroll to the top, you'll see that we have the JSON server watch db.json. That means whenever I run this particular script, this particular command is being executed. Similarly, you can type in ngserve if you want, or you can type in npm run start, and this particular command will be executed, right? So apart from this start command, you also have something called as build, which will come to in the later video. So we'll see how we can use this to actually build our project. So we'll see that in the upcoming videos. Okay, so let's not worry about that for now. Now, since we have the server as well as our Angular application ready, what we can do is that we can go to our browser and we can go to localhost 4200. Okay, so now we have our application, and in this, let's go to our create page. So let's go to blog, and now let's click on add post, and let's type in something. Let's type in, let's say, testing and some dummy content. Now, if I click on create, you'll see that it's not redirecting us to somewhere else, but the data is actually being added to the database. If you go to localhost 3000, where we have our backend, and let's go to posts. If you zoom in, you'll see that we have new blog post called as testing, and the content is dummy content. So now what we want to do is that we want to actually make our user redirect to somewhere else. So in order to do that, what we'll do is that we'll go to our structure once again. That is the project structure. In that, let's go to the TS file wherein we have the on submit logic, right? So through this, we are actually trying to call the service layer. So now what I'll do is that once the post has been added, I can write in a logic inside our subscribe function, right? So whatever we type in inside of the subscribe function will be executed only after this is executed. So in order to actually redirect the user back to somewhere else, we have to actually import a particular module called as router. So I have to first import that, and you don't need to actually add that into the modules file because that is already there by default. So you can type in import router iterate Angular router, right? So you can import that, and we have to create an instance for this as well. So I have to create a new private variable, and it's going to be of type router. Now what I can do is that instead of this, I can create an arrow function, and I can say that this dot router dot, and once I type in dot, you can see that we have some functions that we can execute. In that, there is one called as navigate. So I'll be using that navigate, and in the navigate you have to create an array, and in that you can give the URL or the route that you want to redirect to. In this case, I want to redirect the user back to the blog page. So I'll type in /blog. If I now save this and if I go to my browser and let's create another, dummy title and dummy content. Let's click on create and you'll see that we are actually going back to the blog page, right? And you'll see that we also have the content. I can click on delete and that will be deleted. So in this way, you can create a new blog post and that will be created and you'll be redirected back to the blog page. If you want, you can change that to home page as well. It's your wish. Or if you want, you can add an alert as well. Like that is completely your, preference. So you can use the subscribe function to execute logic once this has been executed to create the post. Now what we'll be doing is that we'll be adding on to this and we'll see how we can, create a function to update the data as well. So before doing anything, let's first go to the service layer and let's create a new function to update the data. So for that, what I'll do is that I'll take my delete post, because for the updating as well, we need the ID. So this will be the function which is similar to that. So I'll copy and paste it here. I'll change it to, let's say, update post or edit post. Let's give it as edit post, because we'll be creating a component called as edit post. So in that, you're gonna have to accept the ID, and what I'll do is that instead of accepting the ID, I'll accept my post completely. Okay, so I'll take my post. So instead of just taking the ID, because we also need the content, right? So what I'll do is that I'll accept my post data completely along with the ID, and then I have to create a URL, right? So it's going to be post.id, because that is going to be a variable. So now I have to use something called as put. So if I use put, then that's going to update the data. So this put is similar to post. Okay, so you have to give apart from this URL, you have to actually give the data that you want to pass as well. So I'll give the URL, then I'll give in the post, and if I save that, that should actually rectify all the errors. Now we can actually call this function from wherever we want. So let me go back to my components. Yeah, before that, let's actually create a component, because we already have a component to create a post. Now let's create a component to update the post. Okay, so let me open my terminal once again, and in that, let's go and let's create a new instance of the terminal. In that, let me type in ng generate component, and it's going to be inside the components folder. In that, let's name it as, let's say, edit post, and let's create that. Once that has been created, let's close off the terminal and let's go to edit-post, and let's go to the HTML file, and in that, let's add in the logic. Okay, so yeah, before that, we have to actually create a route, right? Yeah, before doing anything, let's go to the routes page. Okay, so let's go to the routing, and in that, let's create a new route for editing a blog post. So let me copy this, let's paste it here, and it's going to be edit. So I'll be calling the edit post component. Alright, so now let me check if it's working or not. What I'll do is that I'll go to my post, that is the individual post. Let's go to the HTML and let's create a button or a href or an anchor tag, not a button, because we will not be using a button because we are redirecting the user to another page, right? So we have to create an edit button. So for that, I'll be using the anchor tag and giving the classes of the buttons. So let me create an anchor tag. Let's leave the href empty. Let's name this one as edit, and let's create a button. Let's say it's gonna be button dark, and let's give it as margin end of 3. Let me save that and let's go to the browser to see what we have. Right, so we have an edit button. Now this should, when I click on this, it should actually redirect us to the edit page. So let me add in the router link. So it's gonna be a router link. You have to type it inside square brackets, and it's gonna be equated to, let's say in this case, it's going to be /blog/edit. I think that's what I gave it, right? Yeah, that's what I gave. Let's save that. And if I go to my browser, if I now click on edit, it's going to go to the edit page. So now let's go to the edit page and let's add in the functionality of that blog post. So let's go to this thing. Yeah, let's go to the HTML, and then let's add in the form. Okay, so for this, what I'll do is that I'll just copy the create form that we have for the add post. I'll copy that form completely. I'll paste the same thing inside the edit as well. Let's close this off. So we don't have this on submit function, right? So for now, let me actually remove this on submit as well as ng model and this ng model as well. Okay, so let me save that. Let's go to the browser now and let's click on edit. Yeah, that's going to give me a form. Let's change the title. So it's going to be edit a blog post. Alright, so now what we want to happen is that we want this particular form to be auto-filled with the title and the content. That is the content that we already have. Because if you want to edit something, the content has to be there, right? So we have to have the already created data, and then we can add on our own data into that. So for that, what we have to do is that we have to retrieve that data from the database. So in order to retrieve the data from the database, the main thing that we require is going to be the ID of the blog post. But in this case, we don't have access to the ID anywhere inside our edit component, right? Because we don't know from which component you're calling the edit component. So in order to simplify this, what we do is that when you click on this edit button, apart from this URL that is blog edit, we also send the ID of the blog post that you want to edit. Like in this case, if I type in 1, that's signifying the first blog post. If I type in 3, that's signifying the third blog post. So when I click on edit for the first one, it should be blog/edit/1. If I click on this, it's going to be blog/edit/2. So along with this URL, we have to pass in the ID as well. And the way that we do that is by going to the post component HTML, and along with the /blog/edit, we have to pass in the ID. So for that, you can type in a comma, and in this you can type in the post ID. So it's going to be post.id because you already have access to the post. That's post 1, I think. Yeah. Now what we have to do is that we have to change the route as well, because right now this route will not work for this because this one is a bit different. So we have to make our route dynamic, and it has to accept variables, right? So the URL has to accept variables. So for that, we can type in /:id. So this is signifying that after the slash, you have a variable called as ID, and this colon is signifying that that is a variable. If I now save this, and if I go to my browser, if I now click on edit, you'll see that in the URL bar, you have blog/edit/1. If I click on this edit, it has blog/edit/2. Now I can actually, take this ID from the URL bar, and I can retrieve the data from the database. So in order to do that, let's go to my edit component TS file. So let's go to the TS file. In that, let's actually, create the service layer link, and let's actually create a function inside the service layer as well to retrieve the data. But before doing that, we have to access the URL parameter, right? So in order to actually access that, we have to use another module or another component present inside our router. So previously we've seen how we can redirect the user back to another page using the router module, right? Similar to that, we also have another module inside the router module called as activated route. That module is actually present inside the Angular router as well. So you can just type that in, and that should be imported. Now we have to create an instance for this. Alright, so now let's also create the service layer instance as well, because we'll be using that anyways. So it's going to be private post service, and it's going to be of type post service. Right, so now we have that. Now what we want to happen is that we have to call this service layer function as soon as it executes. But before calling that service layer function, we have to retrieve the data from the URL. So in order to access the data or the variables from the URL, what we can do is that we can use this activated route. So it's going to be this .route . In that, we have a property called as params. In that params, you can subscribe to this, because params is an observable. So you can type in params.subscribe. Now inside this, you can type in the parameters, let's see. Okay, so what this signifies is that inside this activated route, we have a property called as params. In that params, you can actually subscribe to this, because this is an observable, and it's going to return something, that is your URL parameters. So now you can use this particular variable to access the ID that we had passed through the URL. So I can type in parameters and .id. So I can access this, and I can assign this to anything or do whatever I want. So let's do one thing. Let's actually pass this to the service layer. Okay. So before doing that, we have to actually create a service layer function, right, to retrieve the data. So let me go to my service layer, and let's also create another one. So I'll take this get posts, I'll copy and paste it here, or let's do one thing. Let's take the delete component, because I think this would be the similar one, and let's change this to, let's say, get post, because we're trying to get a single post. And this should work. Yeah, we need to type it as get. The URL is going to remain same. We're going to execute that. This should give us the post. Let's save that, and let's go back to the edit. Now let's call this function. So I'll type in this .post service .get post, right? And for that, I'm trying to pass in the parameters.id, right? So for the service layer function, I'm trying to pass in the parameters ID, and this itself is an observable, right? I have to subscribe to this. Now what the service layer function is going to return to us is the post that we want to get from the database, right? So we have to accept that post. So let's give it as retrieved post or something like that, and that has to be equated to, let's say, post. So we have to create a post variable. So it's going to be post. Let's give it of any type, and let's say this dot post is equal to retrieved post. Okay, I think we have some errors because of brackets, so we have to close this off correctly. Yeah, that should rectify the errors. Alright, so now we have the data, right? So this is a complex statement, but what's essentially happening here is that we are using the route, that is the activated route, to get the URL parameters, and that should be present inside the parameters because we are using the subscribe. So now using this, what I'm doing is that I'm trying to call the service layer, and inside that I'm calling the getPost function, and I'm passing the parameters.id. This is going to give us the ID present inside the URL parameters, right? So we had given it as ID, right? So in the routing model, we gave it as ID. So whatever new name that you gave here is the exact name that you have to use here. Okay. So I'm getting that, and what I'm doing is that this is also an observable, right? So I'm trying to subscribe to this, and that's going to return us a post. So we are placing that inside the retrieve post, and what we're doing is that we are trying to assign that retrieve post to a variable called as post, right? So now we can use this post inside our edit component.html page. So I can do either of two things. One is I can use the two-way binding to actually showcase the data present inside of this in this page as well, or I can do something else. I can use something called as form group to showcase the data. So in this case, what I'll do is that I'll use a two-way binding to directly output the data inside this particular edit page. So for that, I'll create a title. So title, and it's going to be, let's say, string. Similarly, let's create content, and it's also going to be a string. And since we don't have the data inside of this, we have to use question mark before the colon, and it signifies that this particular variable, that is title and content, will have the data in the future, but not right now. So it's going to have some data in the future. So what I'll do now is, instead of using this post variable to add the data directly, I'll go here and I'll create a new function. So I'll create the the curly braces. Inside that, I'll type it as this dot title is equal to retrieved post dot title. Okay. Similarly, let's go below this and type in this dot content is equal to retrieved post dot content. That should actually take this data from the retrieved post, that is title and content, and assign it to title and content. Now we can use a two-way binding and output that data in the HTML page. So previously I've shown you how we can add some dummy data or some default data here, and that will be outputted here, right? So we're trying to follow the exact same methodology. So for that, I have to create a ng model, and you have to remember that you have to give the name as well. So this name has to be the same thing that you gave here. So let me create an ng model. So now we have an ng model for the title as well as the content. So let's check if it's working or not. Let's go to the browser and let's click on edit for this. And as you can see here, we have the data in the title as well as the content, right? So now I can, change this, and I can click on create. Yeah, let's edit this button. It's not going to create. Let's give it as update. Now, similarly to how we had, used this particular create function, you have to call the edit function as well from the service layer. So for that, we have to actually submit this form, right? So let me create an on submit as well. So it's going to be ng submit first, because we are using the Angular syntax. And in that, you have to call in the on submit function. So I haven't created the on submit as of yet, but let me create that. So I can create a function which, for this function, we have to submit this data. So let me go to my TS file, and below this, let me create the function on submit. And in this, what I can do is that I can take the title as well as the content, because it is already two-way bound, right? So you're going to have the data inside these two variables. And apart from this, I also need the ID, because if you want to actually update the post, you have to have an ID, right? So let me create the ID as well. Let's add that here. So this is going to be this dot ID is equal to retrieved post dot ID. That should, add the ID to this variable as well. Now what I can do is that I can create a new object from this, and I can pass that object to our service layer. So for that, let me create a new object. It's going to be const Alright, so now I've created a new object. So now what I can do is that I can pass this object to the service layer. And we already have an instance of the service layer, right? Which we had created previously. So now below this, I can type in this dot post service dot update. Or I think, yeah, we give it as edit post. So I can type that out. And that is, you know, an observable. I have to subscribe to this. And let's also pass in the updated post. So this will be sent to the post. So let's go here and yeah, we have the edit post, right? We have to change this to, let's say, any, because I think it's not being accepted right now. Yeah, we had an error previously, but once I went back to the, you know, service layer and changed it to any, that error, you know, disappeared. Okay, so now let's save that and let's go to the browser and let's give it as, let's say, 3 or something like that. Let's click on update. And as you can see, there's no change here, but if I go to my database and if I refresh, you'll see that for the first post, we have the title as 3. So that means it is being updated, but it's not, you know, redirecting back to somewhere else. So we have to change that and we have to do the exact same thing that we had done in the create page as well. So for that, we have to create the router module as well. So similar to how we had done in the create page, we have to import the router and this is present inside the same Angular router. So for that, we have to create another instance. It's going to be private router module. Now I can use that router module and redirect the user back to the, let's say, blocks page. So I'll give it as an arrow function and it's going to be this dot router dot navigate, and in that it's going to be an array. So it's going to be a function and in that it's going to be an array, and then you have to give it a /blog. And if I save that and if I, you know, now click it as, let's say, 1 and click on update, that's going to redirect us back to the blocks page. And if I click on edit once again, you can, you know, get the data back. Let me give it as, let's say, 4 in this case. Click on update, that is being updated. Click on edit, that is being updated as well. Yeah, so that is being done. So now if you want, you can click on delete to delete the post. You can click on edit to edit the post or update the post. You can click on add post to create a new blog post, or you can go to the home page and you can see all the blog posts that you have. So with this, we are basically done with creating a sample blog application, right? So we've covered the 4 basic operations that you see inside of any website, that is create, retrieve, update, and delete. Those are the CRUD operations. So since we have covered all of these, you can now practically make a small project on your own as well. Alright, so before closing this off, I just wanted to say that this video was made in collaboration with packetcode. So packetcode is a training and placement company located in Hyderabad, and these videos were specifically made for the job guarantee training program that they have going on right now, and that is the full stack Java developer program. So apart from these free video lectures, they also have some premium content as well, like lecture notes, practice and test papers for you to get better at your core concepts. And they also have offline as well as online classes for this program. And they also conduct multiple demo sessions as well. So you can attend any of these demo sessions and understand the things they are teaching as well as their training approach firsthand. So if you're interested, I provided the website link in the description down below. You can go there and check them out. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you have liked the video seen till now. If you did, then please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.